Agatha Christie wrote Ordeal by Innocence in 1958. She always considered this one of her favorite books. The other one was Crooked House, and they are both great books. And they really deal with families in interesting ways. This is another disjointed family book. Oddly enough, neither of her favorite books contain Marple or Poirot or Tommy and Tuppence or any of the recurring characters that we're used to. This novel, what makes it so interesting is that it's a murder in retrospect with a nice angle to it. It all centers around Arthur Calgary, and he is a scientist and explorer. He's been off on an expedition. He's just returned after being gone 2 years. And he goes to kind of unburden himself. Apparently 2 years before he went on the expedition, he gave a ride to a hitchhiker at between like 7 and 7:30 one evening, and dropped him off. Then he went into a shop to get something, came out, crossed the street, and was hit by a lorry, and got amnesia and couldn't remember anything that happened. Then, as he recovered, he went off and joined his expedition. What happened during the interim of his time away was that a family by the name of Argyle, on the very night that he was giving a ride to this hitchhiker, the matriarch of this family, Mrs. Argyle, was beaten to death in her private room of their house at Sunny Point, which is also called Viper's Point. And the number one suspect was her son Jacko, or her foster child Jacko. And it was kind of an open and shut case. Everyone assumed that he'd done it. He was the sort of person who might do this sort of thing. He was always asking her for money. She'd refused him. The trouble with this is that Jacko was the hitchhiker who Dr. Calgary gave a lift to, and Mrs. Argyle was murdered quite definitely during that interim period where Dr. Calgary was giving Jacko a lift. So Calgary, of course, realizes he was an alibi for this man, and what had happened to Jacko, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his mother. While he was in prison, after a very short time, he contracted pneumonia and he died. So Calgary feels very guilty, and he goes to the family. He knows it's not going to be an easy task, but he's hoping that this revelation will ease them somewhat, and they can say at least poor Jacko was innocent. For being kind of an intelligent person, as he must be if he's a scientist and explorer, Calgary is not so wise when it comes to understanding the implications of his actions. He goes to Sunny Point and asks to see Leo Argyle, Mrs. Argyle's husband, the father of the family, the patriarch, and his revelation brings anything but comfort and peace. What it brings is a new wave of suspicion, because if Jacko didn't do it, and it wasn't an outsider, it means that someone in the family has committed this murder, and it's reopened the case, and this sort of fog of suspicion will hang over the entire family until it's solved. And because it's kind of a cold case, this is the sort of murder that may never be solved. Leo Argyle is in love with his secretary, Gwenda Vaughn, and they plan on getting married. Now, with this news and this revelation, they cannot get married, because if they even show the police that they are interested in each other, that provides a fresh lead for the police to follow up on, and it would make things very difficult for their relationship. Jacko wasn't the only child in this family. Leo and his wife could not have any children on their own, Mrs. Argyle kind of was fanatically devoted to the idea of motherhood. So she first adopted Mary Durant. Mary was a girl born in New York, and she and her husband adopted her and brought her back to England. Then the wartime came, and the Argyles started taking in children from poorer areas of London who were trying to escape from the bombing. A lot of these kids came from working class families. Sometimes parents disappeared in the bombing. Sometimes the parents just weren't that interested in the kids. And so we have an interesting group of resentful adult children. We have Michael, who's never quite forgotten the fact that his mother left him with the Argyles and never came back for him, and has transferred that hatred for his own mother onto Mrs. Argyle. We, of course, have Jacko, who's the charmer who's always getting into scrapes and trouble, and whom no one can refuse, particularly women, and older women really like him. We have Hester, who's a bit younger, and she's kind of the heart and soul of this piece. She's the one who really questions why Calgary even came here, because she feels she's concerned with the innocent. She says to him, "What about the innocent? We all have to suffer under this until the murder is solved once and for all." And she's really the reason why Calgary decides to stick with this and work with the police and try and find out who actually did kill Mrs. Argyle. We also, as I said, have Mary. Mary lives with her husband, Philip, who was a pilot and who was in an accident and has lost the use of his legs. This level of impotence has created in him kind of a fertile mind, and he's very interested in this investigation and starts kind of throwing some accusations, and that becomes a bit problematic for him in the novel, if you get my drift. We also have Tina, and Tina is described as a half-caste, and she works as a librarian, and she and Michael are very close siblings, even though they aren't really siblings. She's the only one who seems to have had no beef with Mrs. Argyle. She really enjoyed her. She really liked the fact that this family took her in, but she's also kind of a mysterious type character. We also meet Maureen Clegg, who was Jacko's wife, and who the family didn't know about until after Jacko was convicted and died in prison. Then she showed up at the family, and she's like, "Well, can you help me out?" We also have, in addition to Ms. Vaughn, at the household we have Kirsty Lindstrom, who was kind of a governess or housekeeper maid for the family. She'd been with Mrs. Argyle from the beginning and helped her take care of the children, was very fond of the children. She's kind of a stoic Scandinavian character who really resents Argyle's, or not Argyle's, but Calgary's presence on the scene. So this is a novel about the psychology of innocence. It really is one of her better character studies. You get really underneath the skin of the characters. Not as many stereotypical type characters in this one. Very nice study. Though one of the problems I have with it, I don't really have a problem with it, but one of the things that I think could have been improved, that I think the awful film that was made of it, with the ridiculous Dave Brubeck soundtrack. Dave Brubeck's awesome, but it didn't work with this film. But in the film, the way they set it up is that Calgary has just returned from his expedition, never had the amnesia. But he returns home, and in his car he finds this wallet belonging to Jacko. He goes to return it to the family, and that becomes the revelation. He says, "Well, I gave Jacko a lift a couple of years ago, and he left his wallet in my car." And they say, "Oh, when was that?" And he said, "Oh, between 7 and 7:30 on this night." And they said, "You must have that night wrong, because he was killing his mother at that point." And he said, "No, he was most definitely with me." And that's kind of what sets it off. And I think that's a bit more. I think that's a bit more dramatic and more plausible than the whole amnesia angle, which Christie was fond of using. And in fact, in her real life, she used it too. Overall, the novel is great, and I recommend it. I would give it a 4.5 out of 5. It's one of the late great novels from her later period. Next, I'm going to be reading Cat Among the Pigeons, a Hercule Poirot novel.